May 1940. Europe was holding its breath. On paper, France possessed one of the most powerful armies on Earth, millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, massive fortifications, and the legendary Maginot Line, a wall of steel and concrete designed to make invasion impossible. Military experts across the world believed the same thing. If Germany attacked France again, as it had in the First World War, the battle would become a long, grinding war of trenches. But something impossible happened. In just 6 weeks, one of the greatest military powers in human history collapsed. Entire armies disintegrated. Cities fell without resistance. And on June 22, 1940, France surrendered. To many observers, it felt less like a defeat and more like the sudden collapse of an entire civilization. How could a nation that had defeated Germany in World War I lose so catastrophically in World War II? At first glance, the numbers make the mystery even deeper. France and its allies actually had more tanks than Germany. Their tanks were often heavier, better armored, and more powerful. French artillery was legendary. Their soldiers were experienced veterans. And the Maginot Line, stretching across the eastern border, was considered one of the most sophisticated defensive systems ever constructed. Underground railways moved troops quickly. Armored turrets could rise from the earth like mechanical monsters. Some forts were buried so deeply that they could survive weeks of bombardment. To many strategists, France looked practically invincible. Meanwhile, Nazi Germany was still rebuilding after the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles. Its army was smaller. Its equipment was not always superior. By traditional military logic, the outcome of the coming battle seemed predictable. But war is rarely decided by numbers alone. Beneath the surface of military statistics and defensive lines, something far more dangerous was unfolding, something almost invisible at first. German generals were quietly developing an entirely new way of fighting wars. Instead of slow advances and trench stalemates, they imagined speed. Instead of rigid defensive lines, they imagined chaos. Tanks would no longer move slowly behind infantry. They would lead the charge. Aircraft would not simply support battles, they would shatter enemy coordination from the sky. Radio communication would allow entire armies to move like a single organism. It was a terrifying new idea: lightning war. Blitzkrieg. Yet even this does not fully explain what happened. Because France knew Germany might attack. French intelligence monitored German movements. Allied commanders expected the invasion. And when the attack finally came on May 10, 1940, the French army did exactly what it had planned for years. It moved north into Belgium to stop the German advance. Everything appeared to be unfolding according to the strategy developed after World War I. But in war, the most dangerous moment is often the moment when everything seems predictable. Because at that exact moment, something unexpected was already happening far away from the main battlefield. Deep inside a forest that military planners believed tanks could never cross, German armored divisions were moving silently through the Ardennes. To French command, the Ardennes was considered a natural barrier, too dense, too narrow, too difficult for large armies. But German commanders had seen it differently. What if the impossible path was actually the perfect path? What if the strongest defenses in Europe were protecting the wrong place? And by the time France realized what was happening, it was already too late. To understand why France lost the most important battle of 1940, we have to look beyond weapons, numbers, or even courage. The real story lies inside something far more subtle: how armies think. For decades after World War I, French military doctrine was shaped by trauma. The First World War had killed nearly an entire generation of young French men. The trenches, the artillery barrages, the endless stalemate, it left a deep psychological scar on the nation's leadership. Their conclusion was simple and seemingly logical: the next war must be defensive. France would not gamble lives on risky offensives again. Instead, it would build strength, wait for the enemy to attack, and destroy them slowly from fortified positions. In theory, it was a strategy designed to prevent another catastrophe. In reality, it prepared France perfectly for the previous war. Germany, however, was thinking about the future. In the 1930s, several German officers began exploring radical new ideas about mobility and coordination. Among them was Heinz Guderian, a visionary commander obsessed with speed and communication. His concept was revolutionary. Instead of spreading tanks thinly across infantry units, concentrate them into powerful armored spearheads. Break through enemy lines at one point, then drive deep into the rear. Cut supply lines. Destroy communication networks. Collapse the enemy's ability to organize resistance. In traditional warfare, armies moved like slow grinding machines. In this new model, they moved like lightning. Tanks, motorized infantry, and aircraft would operate together with astonishing coordination. And perhaps the most crucial innovation of all was the use of radios. German tank commanders could talk to each other instantly, adapting to the battlefield moment by moment. In contrast, many French tanks had no radios at all. But the true brilliance of the German plan was psychological. Instead of attacking where France was strongest, they attacked where France believed an attack was impossible. The Ardennes forest was considered unsuitable for large armored forces. Its roads were narrow. Its terrain was rough. Its valleys could easily create traffic jams. French planners believed that if Germany tried to send tanks through the region, they would become trapped and vulnerable. So the area was lightly defended. That assumption would become one of the most expensive miscalculations in military history. On May 12, 1940, German armored divisions burst out of the Ardennes and reached the Meuse River near the town of Sedan. French commanders believed they had time to reinforce the area. They were wrong. German Stuka dive bombers screamed down from the sky, attacking defensive positions with terrifying precision. The bombing itself caused limited physical destruction, but its psychological impact was devastating. Many French units had never experienced such concentrated aerial assault. Communication lines broke down. Panic spread. Within hours, German engineers began building bridges across the river. Tanks poured across. The breakthrough had begun. And then the true power of Blitzkrieg revealed itself. German armored divisions did not stop to fight every enemy position. They drove forward relentlessly, sometimes advancing over 50 kilometers in a single day. French commanders struggled to understand what was happening. Their defensive strategy depended on stable front lines. But now the front line had disappeared. German tanks were suddenly everywhere, behind defenses, cutting off entire armies. What looked like a local breakthrough was actually the beginning of something far more catastrophic: the encirclement of the entire Allied Northern Army. And yet, even at this moment, the full disaster was still invisible. Because the most decisive consequence of this breakthrough was not the battles being fought, but the battles that would never happen. Once the German armored spearheads burst through Sedan, the war changed speed. What had begun as a breakthrough quickly became a race against time, and France did not realize it was already losing. German panzer divisions surged westward across northern France like a tidal wave of steel. They did not slow down to consolidate territory or eliminate every pocket of resistance. Instead, they drove toward the English Channel with a singular purpose: cut off the Allied armies advancing into Belgium. Within days, the trap was closing. British, French, and Belgian forces, nearly 1 million soldiers, were suddenly at risk of being surrounded. Entire armies that believed they were advancing against Germany were now being hunted from behind. It was a strategic maneuver so bold that even some German generals feared it might fail. But the gamble worked. On May 20, 1940, German tanks reached the sea. The Allied northern armies were trapped. The consequences were catastrophic. Supply lines vanished overnight. Command structures collapsed under the pressure of speed and confusion. French headquarters struggled to locate enemy forces because the Germans were moving faster than intelligence reports could travel. Roads filled with refugees fleeing south, clogging the same routes military reinforcements needed to reach the front. Entire French divisions waited for orders that never arrived. The war had turned into something unfamiliar, a fluid, chaotic storm of movement where traditional command structures could not keep up. Meanwhile, German units coordinated through radios, adjusting plans in real time, exploiting every weakness they discovered. In this new kind of warfare, hesitation was fatal. One of the most dramatic moments came on the beaches of Dunkirk. Surrounded Allied troops retreated to the coast in a desperate attempt to escape the closing German ring. What followed was one of the most extraordinary evacuations in history. Hundreds of civilian boats, fishing vessels, ferries, pleasure craft, crossed the English Channel under constant threat of air attack. In a matter of days, more than 330,000 soldiers were rescued and carried to Britain. It was a miracle of survival. But it was also a symbol of defeat. The evacuation saved men, but it left behind tanks, artillery, vehicles, and almost all heavy equipment. France now faced the German army largely alone. After Dunkirk, the final collapse came quickly. German forces regrouped and launched a second offensive deeper into France. With their northern armies destroyed or evacuated, French defenses crumbled. Cities fell in rapid succession. On June 14, German troops marched into Paris. Just 8 days later, the French government signed an armistice. In only 6 weeks, one of Europe's most powerful nations had fallen. But the deeper truth of 1940 was not simply that Germany was stronger or France weaker. The real lesson was far more unsettling. Entire civilizations can prepare perfectly for the wrong future. France built the strongest fortress in Europe, but the next war did not attack the fortress. It went around it. Military doctrine, political assumptions, and the trauma of the past shaped decisions that seemed logical at the time. Yet history rarely repeats itself exactly. The tragedy of 1940 reminds us that the greatest dangers are often the ones we believe are impossible. Because sometimes the path that looks too difficult to cross is precisely the one an enemy chooses.